Welcome to WebLizard Lab's CERT Lab. This is SC-500 practice questions, Entra ID and Key Vault security. You will work through 39 questions covering privileged identity management, conditional access, authentication methods, managed identities, and Azure Key Vault security. Listen for the identity, scope, permission plane, and protection requirement that decides each answer. You will hear each complete scenario and every answer choice. For matching questions, you will hear every requirement and every available target. After the cue, lock in your answer. There is a true 3-second silence. The answer then resolves in place before the reasoning canvas explains the decisive distinction. Pause whenever you want additional thinking time. Question 1. Match each access requirement to the appropriate PIM assignment type. Requirement 1. An administrator must perform an action, such as activation, before using the role. Requirement 2. An operations lead must have the role privileges without performing an activation action. A. Requirement 1. Eligible assignment. Requirement 2. Eligible assignment. B. Requirement 1. Eligible assignment. Requirement 2. Active assignment. C. Requirement 1. Active assignment. Requirement 2. Eligible assignment. D. Requirement 1. Active assignment. Requirement 2. Active assignment. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Requirement 1. Eligible assignment. Requirement 2. Active assignment. An eligible assignment requires an action before role use, such as activation or requesting approval. An active assignment provides the assigned role privileges without requiring an activation action. Question 2. You save a new conditional access policy in report-only mode. A pilot user then signs in. Where should you review the result of that report-only policy for this sign-in? A. Open the policy list and change the policy state to on. B. Open the sign-in event in the sign-in logs and select the Report-Only tab. C. Open the directory audit log and inspect the policy update event. D. Open the user's authentication method's registration details. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Open the sign-in event in the sign-in logs and select the Report-Only tab. A report-only policy is evaluated against real-time sign-ins. Its per-policy result for an event is available from that event's report-only tab in the sign-in logs, without enabling enforcement. Question 3. You are piloting Microsoft Authenticator for the Help Desk pilot group. Members of contractors must not be able to use the method, including users who belong to both groups. Which configuration should you make? A. Enable Microsoft Authenticator for all users and leave the pilot and contractor groups unconfigured. B. Enable Microsoft Authenticator for Help Desk Pilot and exclude contractors in the authentication methods policy. C. Configure Microsoft Authenticator in the legacy SSPR security question settings for Help Desk Pilot. D. Enable Passkey Attestation for Help Desk Pilot and exclude contractors from Attestation. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Enable Microsoft Authenticator for Help Desk Pilot and exclude contractors in the authentication methods policy. The authentication methods policy supports enabling a method for selected groups and excluding groups. Targeting Help Desk Pilot and excluding contractors directly enforces both population requirements. Question 4. An ISV registers a multi-tenant application in its home tenant. A customer begins using the application in a different Microsoft Entra tenant. The customer administrator must manage the application's local representation in the customer tenant. Which object should the administrator manage? A. An application object created in the customer tenant. B. A service principal created in the customer tenant. C. The application object stored in the ISV home tenant. D. A globally shared service principal stored in the ISV home tenant. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. A service principal created in the customer tenant. The application object is the global template in the home tenant. A service principal is created in each tenant where the application is used and is the local representation for that tenant. Therefore, the customer administrator manages the customer tenant service principal. Question 5. A Microsoft Entra application does not require user assignment. An authorized administrator grants tenant-wide admin consent to the application. What is the default user access effect? A. All users can access the application unless access is otherwise restricted. B. Only the consenting administrator can access the application. C. Each user must grant separate consent before accessing the application. D. Only application owners can access the application until assignment is enabled. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. All users can access the application unless access is otherwise restricted. By default, tenant-wide admin consent allows all users to access the application unless another configuration restricts access. Requiring user assignment and assigning users or groups is the documented way to restrict who can sign in. Question 6. 3 Azure web apps must use the same managed identity when accessing a downstream service. The identity must remain available when any one web app is replaced. Which identity type should the company use? A. One system-assigned managed identity shared by all 3 web apps. B. One user-assigned managed identity associated with all 3 web apps. C. A separate system-assigned managed identity for each web app, treated as one shared identity. D. Application credentials copied into each web app instead of a managed identity. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. One user-assigned managed identity associated with all 3 web apps. A user-assigned managed identity has an independent lifecycle, and the same identity can be associated with more than one Azure resource. Those properties satisfy both sharing and survival across compute replacement. Question 7. A team is reviewing candidate names for a new Azure Key Vault. Assume that every candidate is currently available. Which name satisfies the syntax documented in the Azure CLI Quick Start? A. Prod Vault 07, B. Prod-Vault 07, C. Prod.Vault.07, D. KV. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Prod Vault 07. The documented name syntax is 3 to 24 characters using only letters, numbers, and hyphens. Prod Vault 07 satisfies those constraints, so B is correct. Question 8. A team is creating an Azure Key Vault for an encryption workload. The encryption keys must be HSM protected. If a key is deleted, it must remain recoverable during the retention period and must not be purgeable before that period expires. Which 2 settings should the team choose? Select 2. A. Use the premium tier. B. Use the standard tier. C. Enable purge protection. D. Leave purge protection disabled. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are A and C. A. Use the premium tier. C. Enable purge protection. Premium provides HSM protected keys. Purge protection prevents a deleted vault or object from being purged before retention expires, while still allowing recovery during retention. Together, A and C satisfy the 2 independent requirements. Question 9. A platform team must manage a Key Vault resource, but must not be able to grant itself access to stored secrets. Which configuration best addresses the documented self-escalation risk? A. Use the Azure RBAC permission model. Grant the team Key Vault Contributor for Vault Resource Management and assign data plane roles separately. B. Use the Access Policy Permission model and grant the team Key Vault Contributor so it can maintain the vault and its access policies. C. Use the Azure RBAC permission model and grant the team Key Vault Secrets Officer instead of a control plane role. D. Use the Access Policy Permission model and grant the team Contributor, relying on the absence of an initial secret read access policy. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Use the Azure RBAC permission model, grant the team Key Vault Contributor for Vault Resource Management, and assign data plane roles separately. Under the Access Policy model, an identity with Contributor, Key Vault Contributor, or another role containing Microsoft.keyvault/vaults/write can configure an access policy and grant itself data plane access. Under Azure RBAC, Key Vault Contributor is limited to control plane vault management and does not grant access to keys, secrets, or certificates. Question 10. A key vault firewall allows the subnet used by an application. Network connectivity to the vault succeeds, but the application's request to read a secret is denied. Which statement best explains the result? A. The subnet rule grants secret access, so the denial can only be a propagation delay. B. Changing the firewall default action to allow grants the application secret access. C. Replacing the subnet rule with a public IP rule grants the application secret access. D. The subnet rule permits network traffic. Authentication and data plane authorization are still required. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. The subnet rule permits network traffic. Authentication and data plane authorization are still required. A firewall rule controls network reachability. It does not grant permission to read secrets. The application still needs Microsoft Entra Authentication and authorization under the Vault's configured data plane model. Therefore, D is correct. Question 11. An application authenticates to a supplier by using a password. You need to store the password in Azure Key Vault and tightly control access to it. The application does not need to perform encryption key operations or manage a TLS certificate. Which Key Vault object function should you use? A. Secret management. B. Key management. C. Certificate management. D. Vault resource property management. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Secret management. Secret management is intended for securely storing and tightly controlling access to passwords and other secrets. The scenario explicitly excludes cryptographic key operations and certificate lifecycle management. Question 12. A security team is investigating secrets discovered on virtual machines connected to Defender for Cloud. Which two actions use investigation surfaces documented for the machine modality? Select 2. A. Use Cloud Security Explorer custom queries or built-in templates to query for VM secret insights across the environment. B. Use Asset Inventory to view secrets discovered on a specific machine. C. Open the recommendation associated with an affected GitHub code repository. D. Use code repository scanning to discover an exposed secret in an Azure DevOps repository. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are A and B. A. Use Cloud Security Explorer custom queries or built-in templates to query for VM secret insights across the environment. B. Use Asset Inventory to view secrets discovered on a specific machine. The machine secret documentation identifies two different investigation surfaces. Cloud Security Explorer queries the Cloud Security Graph for VM secret insights across the environment, while Asset Inventory exposes secrets discovered on a particular machine. Code repository scanning is documented separately for discovering exposed secrets in Azure DevOps, not for investigating secrets discovered on a connected VM. Question 13. Microsoft Defender for Key Vault raises an alert after unusual secret enumeration activity. The source address is registered to Microsoft, but no approved maintenance record accounts for the operation. Which triage decision should the analyst make? A. Close the alert after recording the Microsoft address registration as the activity origin. B. Keep the alert open only for maintenance record reconciliation because the address identifies a Microsoft-operated task. C. Continue investigating the identity, operation, and timeline because a Microsoft address does not establish who performed the activity. D. Suppress the address range for Key Vault alerts and resume source investigation if a non-Microsoft address appears. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Continue investigating the identity, operation, and timeline because a Microsoft address does not establish who performed the activity. Azure virtual machines can be assigned Microsoft IP addresses, so an alert can contain a Microsoft IP even when the related activity was performed from outside Microsoft. The address registration, therefore, does not establish the actor or origin, and the alert still requires investigation. Question 14. An administrator configures an Azure resource role in PIM to require approval for activation of eligible assignments. The administrator leaves the approver list empty because they expect PIM to supply a default approver. What should the administrator do? A. Leave the list empty because PIM automatically uses the resource owner. B. Assign a PIM role to the intended approver so that the approver is added automatically. C. Require a support ticket number so that the ticket owner becomes the approver. D. Select at least one approver explicitly. No default approvers are provided. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Select at least one approver explicitly. No default approvers are provided. When approval is required for activation, the configuration must include at least one explicitly selected approver. PIM does not provide default approvers, and the selected approver does not have to hold a role. Question 15. You are building a conditional access policy for a payroll application. Match each requirement to the policy component where it belongs. Use each component once. 1. Evaluate the policy only for employees assigned the payroll administrator directory role. 2. Evaluate the policy only when the sign-in destination is the payroll cloud application. 3. Permit the sign-in only after the employee satisfies the organization's configured authentication strength. 4. Change how often employees must sign in again while they continue using the application. A. Grant access control. B. Target resources assignment. C. Session access control. D. Users and groups assignment. Lock in your answer. The correct matches are: Item 1 matches choice D, Users and Groups Assignment. Item 2 matches choice B, Target Resources Assignment. Item 3 matches choice A, Grant Access Control. Item 4 matches choice C, Session Access Control. A directory role identifies who is included, so it belongs in the Users and Groups assignment. A cloud application is the destination resource, so it belongs in the Target Resources assignment. Requiring the configured authentication strength is an enforcement prerequisite under Grant Access Control. Changing how often a person must sign in again uses sign-in frequency, which is a session access control. Therefore, T1-D, T2-B, T3-A, and T4-C are the only matching pairs. Question 16. You are preparing a comparison of device-bound and synced passkeys for a workforce rollout. Which two statements are correct? Select 2. A. A device-bound passkey private key is stored on one physical device and never leaves it. B. A synced passkey private key remains usable only on the physical device where it was created. C. A synced passkey supports attestation when its cloud passkey provider is approved. D. An encrypted synced passkey key can be used on other devices authenticated with the passkey provider. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are A and D. A. A device-bound passkey private key is stored on one physical device and never leaves it. D. An encrypted synced passkey key can be used on other devices authenticated with the passkey provider. The private key for a device-bound passkey remains on one physical device. For a synced passkey, an encrypted key is synchronized through the cloud passkey provider and may be used on other devices authenticated with that provider. Question 17. You are registering two applications in Microsoft Entra ID. Ledger Cloud is a SaaS application that must accept organizational accounts from any Microsoft Entra tenant, but not personal Microsoft accounts. Game Profile must accept only personal Microsoft accounts. Which two configurations should you select? Select 2. A. For Ledger Cloud, select multiple Entra ID tenants. B. For Ledger Cloud, select any Entra ID tenant plus personal Microsoft accounts. C. For Game Profile, select personal accounts only. D. For Game Profile, select single tenant only, Contoso. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are A and C. A. For Ledger Cloud, select multiple Entra ID tenants. C. For Game Profile, select personal accounts only. A is correct because multiple Entra ID tenants is intended for organizational users in any Microsoft Entra tenant. C is correct because personal accounts only limits Game Profile to personal Microsoft accounts. Together, these settings match both audience constraints without adding an unintended account population. Question 18. A company disables user consent after discovering that users previously granted a risky application access to organizational data. The company must prevent new user consent and also stop access provided by the existing grants. What should an identity administrator do? A. Only disable user consent because the setting automatically revokes all existing grants. B. Keep user consent disabled and assign a restrictive user consent policy to the application's users. C. Keep user consent disabled and separately review and revoke the application's existing consent grants. D. Keep user consent disabled and hide the enterprise application from users in My Apps. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Keep user consent disabled and separately review and revoke the application's existing consent grants. Changes to user consent settings apply to future consent operations. Existing consent grants remain unchanged, so revoking those grants is a separate operation required to stop the access they already provide. Question 19. A company separates duties for user-assigned managed identities. Analyst 1 must only list and read identities. Engineer 1 must create and delete identities. The company wants to use the least privileged documented role for each person. Which assignments should the company use? A. Assign Managed Identity Contributor to Analyst 1 and Managed Identity Operator to Engineer 1. B. Assign Reader to Analyst 1 and Managed Identity Operator to Engineer 1. C. Assign Reader to Analyst 1 and Managed Identity Contributor to Engineer 1. D. Assign Managed Identity Contributor to both Analyst 1 and Engineer 1. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Assign Reader to Analyst 1 and Managed Identity Contributor to Engineer 1. Reader provides control plane read access without allowing changes, so it satisfies Analyst 1's read-only duty. Managed Identity Contributor is documented to create, read, update, and delete user-assigned managed identities, so it satisfies Engineer 1's create and delete duty. Question 20. You create an Azure Key Vault by using the Azure CLI. The deployment output lists both vault name and vault URI. A developer is configuring an application that calls the vault through its REST API. Which value should the developer use as the vault endpoint? A, the vault URI, B, the vault name, C, the resource group name, D, the deployment location. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A, the vault URI. The CLI Quick Start distinguishes vault name from vault URI and states that applications using the vault through its REST API must use the vault URI. Therefore, A is the single best answer. You've completed 20 questions. Take a moment to reset your attention. In the remaining questions, keep separating network reachability from authorization, control plane roles from data plane access, and configuration defaults from protections that must be enabled explicitly. Question 21. An Azure Key Vault was created with a 30-day retention interval. A new compliance rule requires a 90-day retention interval for deleted vault objects. Which action can establish the required retention setting? A. Update the existing vault's retention interval to 90 days. B. Enable purge protection and then edit the existing interval. C. Disable and re-enable soft delete with a 90-day interval. D. Create a new vault and configure a 90-day interval during creation. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Create a new vault and configure a 90-day interval during creation. The retention interval is configured only when the vault is created and cannot be changed afterward. A new vault configured for 90 days at creation is therefore the supported way to establish that setting. Question 22. A production key vault uses the legacy access policy permission model. Several applications depend on existing access policies to read secrets. The security team will migrate the vault to Azure RBAC and must avoid a data plane outage. A delegated administrator currently has Key Vault Data Access Administrator and Key Vault Contributor. Which plan meets the requirements? A. Assign equivalent Azure data roles to every dependent principal first, then have an owner or a user access administrator who also has Key Vault Contributor change the permission model. B. Change the permission model first. After the access policies stop applying, translate each access policy into an equivalent Azure data role. C. Assign equivalent Azure data roles first, then have the delegated administrator use Key Vault Data Access Administrator alone to change the permission model. D. Change the permission model while retaining the existing access policies as the application's data plane authorization until Azure role assignments are added. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Assign equivalent Azure data roles to every dependent principal first, then have an owner or a user access administrator who also has Key Vault Contributor change the permission model. Switching a vault to the Azure RBAC permission model invalidates access policy permissions, so equivalent Azure roles must be assigned before the switch to avoid an outage. Changing the model requires unrestricted Microsoft/Bytography role assignments/write. Owner can supply that authority. User Access Administrator can also do so, but additionally needs Microsoft.keyvault/vaults/write, available through Key Vault Contributor. Question 23. A key vault uses a default deny firewall. An external monitoring appliance has one stable public IPv4 address. An Azure VM has no suitable static public IP address and runs in the apps subnet of a virtual network. Which two firewall rules should you configure? Select 2. A. Add an IP rule for the monitoring appliance's public IPv4 address. B. Add a virtual network rule for the VM's virtual network and apps subnet. C. Add a public IP rule for the VM's RFC 1918 private address. D. Add a firewall IP rule using the monitoring appliance's IPv6 address. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are A and B. A. Add an IP rule for the monitoring appliance's public IPv4 address. B. Add a virtual network rule for the VM's virtual network and apps subnet. A stable public IPv4 workload is appropriate for a Key Vault firewall IP rule. For an Azure VM without a suitable static public IP, the documented approach is to place it in a virtual network and allow the specific virtual network and subnet. Therefore, A and B are correct. Question 24. An automation account is already authenticated and authorized for Azure Key Vault Data Plane Object Management. Match each required outcome to the operation that achieves it. Use each choice once. 1. Generate fresh cryptographic material as a new version under an existing identifier. 2. Persist a new credential string under a chosen name. 3. Bring an externally issued X509 bundle and its private key into the vault. 4. Return a soft deleted item to active use. A. Recover the deleted object. B. Import the certificate. C. Rotate the key. D. Set the secret. Lock in your answer. The correct matches are: Item 1 matches choice C, rotate the key. Item 2 matches choice D, set the secret. Item 3 matches choice B, import the certificate. Item 4 matches choice A, recover the deleted object. With authentication and authorization already satisfied, the required outcomes are data plane object management tasks. Rotation creates a new version with fresh key material. Setting stores a secret value. Certificate import brings an existing X509 certificate into the vault. And recovery returns a soft deleted object to use. Question 25. GitHub Advanced Security scans a GitHub repository and discovers an exposed secret. A security analyst wants to open the Defender for Cloud item associated with the affected repository. Which surface should the analyst use? A. The recommendation triggered for the relevant code repository on the Defender for Cloud recommendations page. B. An exposed secret attack path for the GitHub repository. C. The secrets view for a specific machine in Defender for Cloud asset inventory. D. A built-in VM secret template in Cloud Security Explorer. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. The recommendation triggered for the relevant code repository on the Defender for Cloud recommendations page. The repository scanning evidence states that when secrets are found, Defender for Cloud triggers a recommendation for the relevant code repository. The scenario names GitHub, so the provider-qualified exposed secret attack path boundary does not apply. The other surfaces are documented for machine or VM secrets. Question 26. A platform team is preparing to enable the Defender for Key Vault plan. Which 2 prerequisites should the team verify? Select 2. A. The Key Vault firewall is already enabled. B. An Azure subscription is available. C. A Key Vault access policy entry exists for every security analyst. D. Microsoft Defender for Cloud is enabled on the subscription. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B and D. B. An Azure subscription is available. D. Microsoft Defender for Cloud is enabled on the subscription. The documented prerequisites are an Azure subscription and Microsoft Defender for Cloud enabled on that subscription. Therefore, B and D are correct. Question 27. A company configures PIM settings for an Azure resource role. Each activation must expire after no more than 4 hours, without changing how long the eligible assignment exists. Which two statements support the required configuration? Select two answers. A. Assignment maximum duration controls how long each activated role remains active. B. Activation maximum duration controls how long an activated role assignment remains active before it expires. C. 4 hours is unavailable because activation maximum duration supports only 1 through 3 hours. D. 4 hours is valid because the documented activation maximum duration range is 1 through 24 hours. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B and D. B. Activation maximum duration controls how long an activated role assignment remains active before it expires. D. 4 hours is valid because the documented activation maximum duration range is 1 through 24 hours. Activation maximum duration sets the maximum time an activated role assignment remains active before it expires. The documented range is 1 through 24 hours. So, a 4-hour cap is valid. It addresses the active period after activation. Question 28. A finance user signs into the payroll app from a trusted network. 2 enabled conditional access policies apply. Policy 1 requires multi-factor authentication. Policy 2 targets finance users, the payroll app, and the trusted network, and requires a compliant device. The user satisfies all 3 assignments in Policy 2. What must the user do to gain access? A. Satisfy only Policy 1 because it is evaluated before Policy 2. B. Complete multi-factor authentication only because Policy 2 has several assignments. C. Complete multi-factor authentication and use a compliant device. D. Satisfy either multi-factor authentication or device compliance because the policies are alternatives. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Complete multi-factor authentication and use a compliant device. Both policies apply, so both must be satisfied. Policy 2 is triggered because all of its configured assignments are satisfied. Its compliant device requirement therefore applies in addition to Policy 1's multi-factor authentication requirement. Question 29. A regulated administrator group currently uses synced passkeys on multiple devices. New policy requires passkey attestation so that only credentials tied to a physical device are accepted. Which passkey profile change meets the requirement? A. Enable attestation and allow synced passkeys only. B. Disable attestation and require passkey provider synchronization. C. Enable attestation and require device-bound passkeys. D. Enable attestation and permit both device-bound and synced passkeys. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Enable attestation and require device-bound passkeys. When attestation is enabled, only device-bound passkeys are allowed, and synced passkeys are excluded. Requiring device-bound passkeys therefore satisfies the provenance requirement. Question 30. An automation pipeline sends a Microsoft Graph request that creates an application object for a single-tenant daemon app. The request succeeds. The app must now have an identity in the tenant so administrators can assign tenant-specific permissions. Which action should the pipeline perform next? A. Add a client secret to the application object and use that credential as the tenant local identity. B. Create the service principal in a separate graph request and use it as the tenant local identity. C. Add an app role to the application object and use that role as the tenant local identity. D. Change the application to multitenant and use its application object as the tenant local identity. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Create the service principal in a separate graph request and use it as the tenant local identity. An application object is the global definition of the app, while a service principal is its local representation in a tenant. When Microsoft Graph APIs create the application object, creating the corresponding service principal is a separate step. That follow-up object provides the tenant local identity needed for tenant-specific access assignments. Question 31. A nightly inventory service calls an API when no user is signed in. The service must receive access associated with the granted OAuth permission rather than act within a user's access. Which access configuration should the application use? A. Delegated permissions authorized through the authorization code flow. B. Application permissions authorized for app-only access. C. Delegated permissions authorized through the device code flow. D. Delegated permissions used in an on-behalf of flow. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Application permissions authorized for app-only access. Application permissions, also called app roles, support app-only access without a signed-in user. They allow the application to access data associated with the granted permission, which fits the unattended service. Question 32. 3 independently deployed Azure resources must authenticate without stored credentials. An audit rule also requires all 3 resources to present the same managed identity service principal. Which identity design meets the requirement? A. Enable a separate system-assigned managed identity on every resource. B. Assign one user-assigned managed identity only to the deployment coordinator. C. Enable one system-assigned managed identity and reuse it on the other resources. D. Assign one user-assigned managed identity to each of the 3 resources. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Assign one user-assigned managed identity to each of the 3 resources. A user-assigned managed identity is created as its own Azure resource and can be assigned to multiple Azure resources. Assigning the same user-assigned identity to all 3 resources preserves one managed identity principal across the deployments. Question 33. A company is creating an Azure Key Vault for signing keys. Its retention policy requires administrators to activate a control that will prevent a later administrator from permanently deleting protected vault contents during the retention period. A deployment note says to keep the recovery defaults without further configuration. Which corrected note should the cloud engineer approve? A. Keep the recovery defaults because they enable purge protection and permit administrators to turn it off later. B. Select Enable Purge Protection during vault creation because the defaults omit it and it cannot be disabled afterward. C. Select Purge Protection during vault creation and schedule the setting to be disabled when the retention period ends. D. Create the vault with the defaults because Purge Protection is available only after the creation workflow is complete. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Select Enable Purge Protection during vault creation because the defaults omit it and it cannot be disabled afterward. The Azure Portal Quick Start states that the recovery options defaults do not enable purge protection, directs the administrator to select Enable Purge Protection, and states that purge protection cannot be disabled after it is enabled. Therefore, the deployment must explicitly enable the setting rather than rely on the defaults. Question 34. An operations team is writing a recovery runbook for a purge-protected Azure Key Vault that might be deleted accidentally. Which complete runbook entry correctly describes recovery during the configured retention period? A. Recover the vault and its objects during retention. Purge remains blocked until retention expires. Event grid subscriptions must be recreated, but Azure RBAC role assignments return with the vault. B. Recover the vault and its objects only after retention expires. Purge remains blocked until then. Azure RBAC role assignments and event grid subscriptions must both be recreated. C. Recover the vault and its objects during retention. Purge remains blocked until retention expires. Azure RBAC role assignments and event grid subscriptions must both be recreated. D. Recover the vault and its objects during retention. An authorized operator can purge before retention expires. Azure RBAC role assignments and event grid subscriptions must both be recreated. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Recover the vault and its objects during retention. Purge remains blocked until retention expires. Azure RBAC role assignments and event grid subscriptions must both be recreated. A purge-protected vault and its objects remain recoverable during retention, while purge is blocked until retention expires. Recovering the vault does not restore integrated Azure RBAC role assignments or event grid subscriptions, so both integrations must be recreated. Question 35. A key vault uses the Azure RBAC permission model. Match each task to the least privilege built-in role documented for that capability. Each role is used once. 1. Read secret contents without administering secrets. 2. Perform any action on secrets except manage permissions. 3. Manage the vault resource without accessing stored keys, secrets, or certificates. 4. Assign or remove the permitted set of Key Vault data roles as a restricted delegate. A. Key Vault contributor. B. Key Vault secrets user. C. Key Vault data access administrator. D. Key Vault secrets officer. Lock in your answer. The correct matches are: Item 1 matches choice B, Key Vault secrets user. Item 2 matches choice D, Key Vault secrets officer. Item 3 matches choice A, Key Vault contributor. Item 4 matches choice C, Key Vault data access administrator. Secrets user reads secret contents. Secrets officer administers secrets but cannot manage permissions. Key Vault contributor manages the vault resource only and has no data plane object access. Key Vault Data Access Administrator has restricted authority to assign or remove specified Key Vault roles. Question 36. A service that is confirmed to appear in the current Trusted Services table can reach a Key Vault while public network access is disabled, and Trusted Services bypass is enabled. You then associate the vault with a network security perimeter by using Secure by Perimeter. No perimeter access rule admits the service. What should you expect? A. The service continues to reach the vault because Trusted Services bypass always takes precedence. B. The service continues to reach the vault because perimeter access rules apply only to services outside the Trusted Services table. C. Secure by Perimeter blocks the service until an explicit perimeter access rule admits it. D. The service continues to reach the vault unless the Key Vault firewall is enabled separately from the perimeter association. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Secure by Perimeter blocks the service until an explicit perimeter access rule admits it. The Trusted Services bypass can continue when public network access is disabled. However, Secure by Perimeter through a network security perimeter overrides that bypass. Without an explicit perimeter access rule, the trusted service is blocked. Therefore, C is correct. Question 37. An infrastructure administrator and a restricted Key Vault access delegator have completed the vault control plane and role assignment tasks. A delegated key operator must rotate an existing encryption key immediately. An application operator must prevent disruption while data encryption keys are rewrapped with the new key version. Which two actions should the runbook require? Select 2. A. Manually invoke on-demand rotation for the existing key immediately. B. Keep both old and new key versions enabled until rewrapping completes. C. Change the policy's expiry time setting and treat that as immediate rotation. D. Disable the old key version when rotation completes before rewrapping. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are A and B. A. Manually invoke on-demand rotation for the existing key immediately. B. Keep both old and new key versions enabled until rewrapping completes. On-demand rotation is the documented action for rotating the existing key immediately. Rotation creates a new key version and rewraps data encryption keys. Because existing data can still depend on data encryption keys wrapped by the old version, both old and new key versions must remain enabled until rewrapping is complete. Question 38. An Azure DevOps repository has the necessary GitHub Advanced Security license. The repository is archived. The security team must scan all of its Git history for secrets and detect whether exposed secrets create lateral movement possibilities to runtime resources. Which two statements identify the required capabilities? Select 2. A. GitHub Advanced Security scans the entire Git history on all branches, including when the repository is archived. B. Defender CSPM is required to detect lateral movement possibilities to runtime resources. C. Foundational CSPM performs the runtime lateral movement detection after the scan. D. Asset Inventory performs the repository history scan because the repository is archived. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are A and B. A. GitHub Advanced Security scans the entire Git history on all branches, including when the repository is archived. B. Defender CSPM is required to detect lateral movement possibilities to runtime resources. The code repository evidence assigns the full history scan, including archived repositories, to GitHub Advanced Security. It separately states that Foundational CSPM provides viewing of findings, whereas Defender CSPM is required to detect lateral movement possibilities to runtime resources. Question 39. A security operations team needs to detect unusual and potentially harmful attempts to access or exploit key vaults. The team also wants alerts that include suspicious activity details and investigation and remediation recommendations. Which capability should the team implement? A. Enable the Key Vault firewall and allow only trusted resources and virtual networks. B. Enable the Defender for Key Vault plan to provide threat detection and security alerts. C. Remove a security principal from a Key Vault access policy. D. Restrict the operations a security principal can perform in a Key Vault access policy. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Enable the Defender for Key Vault plan to provide threat detection and security alerts. Defender for Key Vault is the documented capability that detects unusual and potentially harmful attempts to access or exploit key vaults. Its alerts include suspicious activity details and recommendations for investigation and remediation. Therefore, B is correct. You have completed all 39 questions in SC-500 practice questions, Entra ID, and Key Vault Security. Review the distinctions you missed, especially Identity Lifecycle, Conditional Access Evaluation, Key Vault Authorization, Recovery Protection, and Threat Detection. Thanks for practicing with Web Lizard Lab's CertLab.